Good morning, listeners. Welcome once again to Morning Coffee Book Reviews. Myself, Tushar. And once again, we have that legend with us who generally talks about books in a magical way because I've been hearing him read books since many years. Now he's with us again. His name is Alok Kumar, as you already know, ex-professor from Vrindavan University, and now he is with us with another journey with another book of his. So welcome Alok to the show. Welcome listeners. So let's hear it out. So what do you have today, Alok?
The name of the book is What the Dog Saw,
Okay.
and the author is Malcolm Gladwell.
So why did
Malcolm
you choose
Gladwell-
that book first of all?
Well, I have been reading Malcolm Gladwell for quite some time. I've read his other books, and you must have seen many of his books on display on bookshops and on
right.
other train stations and other airport stations. His other books, Blink, Outliers, these are his other works for which he is quite famous. He's one of the very famous authors in the non-fiction genre. So I like his earlier books, but the one that I've liked most is this one, the What the Dog Saw.
Why this book in particular?
This book is a collection of his essays that he wrote for the American magazine, The New Yorker. He was a staff writer for the New Yorker magazine. And over a period of something like 7 or 8 years, he wrote a lot of articles, and this is a collection of those articles. And so each piece is an essay on a particular topic which Gladwell deals with so amazingly. What happens is he picks out, very simple events, situations, incidents, and then he goes into the details of it, and then he comes out with a conclusion that will really shock you in the end. So that's the kind of book it is, What the Dog Saw.
Okay.
It has got 3 sections. The first is a section, 3 parts. Part 1 is about minor geniuses. So in this part, he talks about people, as the name suggests, minor geniuses. He's not talking about those well-known world geniuses like Einstein or Feynman or such people. He's talking about simple people that he met in the course of his life, who turned out to be geniuses in their own sphere. For example, he talked about a particular guy who in America who made this kitchen cutting machine very famous. So he talks about his quality of sales, and he goes into the details about it. There's a chapter. The first chapter is called The Pitchman. His sales pitch used to be so amazing, and it is on the basis of that sales pitch alone that he established $1 billion vegetable cutting machine industry.
Okay.
And he talks about his passion and all. But so he talks about a couple of other such people. For example, there's a dog trainer, and that's the chapter What the Dog Saw, from which the book gets its name. He talks about a dog trainer named by the name of Cesar Millan.
Okay.
This dog trainer has an uncanny knack of understanding what a dog is thinking, and he talks about his life. This guy Cesar Millan was actually an immigrant from Mexico to America, and he was earlier working for very menial jobs, but then he realized that his real talent laid in training dogs, and then he just became famous. So he talks about his way of handling dogs, the way he was able to train the most ferocious dogs into submission, and he talks about such incidents. But the interesting thing is that this same guy, Cesar Millan, who is so good at reading a dog's mind, is not really very good at interpersonal skills.
Okay.
He gets into conflicts with others. He's unable to understand his own wife, but he understands his dog much better. So That's a kind of an interesting take that he gives. But that's the first part, minor geniuses.
Okay.
The second part, which is the most interesting part of the book, and this is about theories, predictions, and diagnosis. And this is a book. This part is about what he does in this part is he talks about a lot of incidents that have happened in recent world history, like 9/11. Like the Israel-Arab war, like sporting incidents, like Steffi Graf beating Yana Novotná in a women's final. And what he does is, he goes through all these incidents and he talks about them, and he comes out with some piece of conclusion that is really very unconventional and very shocking, but very convincing. So, for example, there's a chapter on 9/11, which he calls "Connecting the Dots." So, in that chapter, he talks about the fact that when these terrorists hit the World Trade Center, then there was this commission that went into which investigated what lapses occurred, and then they came out with their commission report, which suggested that the FBI and the CIA needs to work together. Okay, and that is the conclusion that the whole world accepted, and everybody in the world thinks that the 9/11 attacks took place because the FBI and the CIA did not share information which was available to both. But this is where Gladwell's insight comes in. He says that it is very easy to reconstruct an event in retrospect and say that this is what went wrong. But then he goes into the history of FBI and CIA, and he says that the whole creation of CIA in 1947, FBI is older of the two, was because F.D. Roosevelt wanted two rival agencies which did not interact with one another, and which would give reports to the president, and which would sort of be rivals. And that rivalry is what was supposed to fine-tune the intelligence, was supposed to make the intelligence better. Okay? So that was the rationale for starting up the CIA. And Gladwell says that the 9/11 Commission report, which indicted both these organizations for failing to do their job because they did not coordinate properly, says that it's a conclusion that has been reached in hindsight, which is very easy. Whenever an event happens, you are able to reconstruct it and say, well, this is what went wrong, and somehow we should have done this. But he talks about that, but that's a psychological trick that the mind plays. He talks about an experiment that a psychologist did when Nixon went to visit China. And before he went to visit China, he talked to a lot of people and asked them, what do you expect out of this visit? At that time, China and America, like today, they were at loggerheads. They were not getting along well. Right. So each of those respondents was extremely pessimistic. What happened actually was that when Nixon visited China, the visit went off extremely well, and China and America came out in flying colors after the visit. So then he went back to those respondents, and then he asked them to recall what they had said about it. And surprisingly, everyone who had been pessimistic started pretending or started convincing themselves that they had said exactly the same thing what actually happened, that it would turn out well. Why? When in fact, what they had said, it was recorded, was they were very pessimistic. So that's what happens in hindsight. Right. Whenever something has occurred and you know the details, you start convincing yourself that if these things were, this is what I believed. So in retrospect, an outcome of a particular event, it colors your perception. So that is how you become blindsided. So what he's saying is that this essay was written by Malcolm Gladwell after the 9/11 Commission report came out in 2002. So he writes that this whole conclusion that the Commission has come out with, that the FBI and CIA failed to play the role that they're supposed to play is a wrong conclusion. He says that it isn't about the limitations of intelligence agencies. It's about the limitations of intelligence itself. Intelligence is a flawed thing. It is not omniscient. It doesn't know everything, and it cannot know everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, once an event has occurred, somehow this omniscient attitude takes over, and you believe that we could have done this, we could have done that, without realizing that when the FBI and CIA put together their heads to find out what the intelligence is indicating, there is so much of background noise. I mean, background noise in the sense of there's so much of other information available to them, which kind of makes it difficult for them to predict what will happen. So again, that's an amazing essay on connecting the dots. Then there's another essay on sporting events.
Right.
He starts with the final Wimbledon, in which Yana Novotná is about to win the match. She is at match point, in fact, and she's playing with Steffi Graf. Okay, and she's at match point, and suddenly she does a double fault, and the whole game unravels after that. She loses the match eventually, and this is an essay. Is the name of Art of Failure. It's why some people choke and others panic. So what he says is, and he analyzes this, why Yana Novotná, who was on the brink of winning a Wimbledon trophy, suddenly from her match point, and it happens to so many people. You've seen it so many times in tennis in particular, that from on the verge of victory, they eventually end up, being worsted out. So what he says is, when Novotná was at that match point and she made a double fault, suddenly she switched to a choking mode.
Right.
What this is what he says is that after that she started making more and more errors because she became very conscious of the audience, of the importance of the match and everything. So what he says is there's an explicit learning and there's an implicit learning. When we play a game well, we do it unconsciously. This is what we call being in the flow,
Right.
You come in the flow of things. And this flow is unconscious. Now when you start becoming conscious, suddenly your game is hampered completely.
Right.
You start making unforced. It happens with everyone, whether it is a great musician who has trained himself into perfection, and suddenly he gets out of that flow zone and starts making errors, and then it starts augmenting and spiraling out of control. So that's what he calls choking, which is the interference of your conscious with your unconscious skill. Now the opposite of it is panicking. Now choking and panicking sound very similar, but he says that they are worlds apart. Panicking is what took place when in 1999 a plane crashed in America, and the plane and the person who died was none other than the son of John F. Kennedy, the president, John F. Kennedy Jr. John F. Kennedy was a trained pilot who had flown many hours, and this was one of the flights that he took normally, and it was a very ordinary flight. But what happened, it was revealed later on that he relied. It was an evening flight. He took off from his home to a destination in the evening, in the dark, and he had flown in the dark. But he used to rely on the ground lights. Okay. And suddenly, and that day there was a power outage at some place, and so the ground went completely dark.
Okay.
And he panicked, because, and then what took over was a complete the opposite of choking, which is in panic you stop thinking. In choking you start thinking too much.
Right.
And both of them are dangerous. Panicking is more dangerous because you are completely relying on your instinct. And that's when he crashed his two-seater plane into the sea and died. So, this is a beautiful essay where he talks about these differences between what happens when people choke and when they panic. People who are experts, right? There's another incident where he talks about a golf championship between the great legend of golf, Nick Faldo, with the American golf legend also Norman. Now, Nick Faldo was much more well known at that time, but in this championship, Norman of America was ahead of Nick Faldo, way ahead. So he was going to win the match. Now, he made a shot which was basically a very silly kind of a shot. And that's when he lost it, because he was still ahead, but Nick Faldo was still playing his normal game. But Norman, the American golfer, he choked. He started becoming very conscious of his shot. And then eventually, by the time game ended, Nick Faldo won. Just like Jan Novotna's and Steffi Graf's match in Wimbledon. But what happened was very interesting, because Nick Faldo realized what had happened. He said after the match that it was a lost match. I didn't win. He lost. And he told, he whispered in the ears of Norman, I know what happened. You choked. I didn't win. And both of them then embraced each other and cried, because Nick Faldo knew what happened, and he was too aware that it can happen to anyone.
Right.
So that's how even great players eventually end up losing, because at one split second, suddenly their mind shifts, and no one is in control of them of this. I mean, it's a strange thing that happens. So this whole book is full of such incidents, and the way he connects is amazing. So I would say recommend this book to anyone. What the Dog Saw by Malcolm Gladwell.
Very interesting. Thank you very much, Alok, for this wonderful journey once again. Thank you, listeners. We will come back for another episode. Goodbye till then. Thanks, Alok.